Here we are back at the shop working on Petty Chevy, which is our Street Legal Legends car build. We're going to continue working on our front bumper. We're going to try and get that mocked up in space and figure out how we can build some brackets to get this adhered to the car. It's presenting a lot of challenges so far, so let's go ahead and dive into that and I'll explain what's going on. So what I've got for the front bumper Petty Chevy so far is last week you would have seen that we took the Jeep Wrangler bumper and cut a 10.5-inch segment out of the center of it to segment everything in and just overall shrink the size of the bumper. What I did last week was just kind of visually set up my tires and get a good reference point of what distance does the bumper stick out from the tires right now, assuming that the wheels are straight. However, what I've run into now is I've just noticed that on this setup, the tie rods are not set equally. I don't think that's going to present me with much of a problem as far as how much I segmented out of the bumper, because it's still a good even number and it shrank it a good bit. But as you can see over on this right side, there's a lot of toe out on this side compared to the other side, which is completely towed in as far as it can be. So one thing I'm going to have to work on before I actually am able to mock this up in space and get a good, close as I can, correct center line, I've got to try and correct the distance between the wheels. I don't really have a way to measure the distance across the back of the tires as you would in an old school fashion. Just find a certain spot on the tread, measure the distance from the front and the rear and compare the two and get them close. I can't really do that with the way the frame's set up on this, but I think what I'm going to do is just toe in the right front side as far as I can go, make it even to the left side, try and get it visually straight and work on it from there. So as I was turning the steering rod inward to get this tire towed back in, I noticed that there's actually going to be a lot of pull on this side. So what that also tells me is that that side being towed in as far as it is, it's not going to be a good idea to match this, because then this is just going to be towed in way more than that. Which means I don't have my steering wheel pretty much straight. So I'm going to have to go and work on the other side and kind of just see if I can get these rods to the same length and then match the visual appearance of the two, and then that will give me a better idea of what actual true center of this car is set. Adjusting the tie rods evenly side to side was starting to get me into the right direction, but I still had to try and play around with the steering wheel to measure things and make sure that they were even. Here I was actually measuring the distance between the end of the jam nut and the end of the steering linkage arm. I was trying to get these close to about 10 millimeters, so that way the exposed thread depth that was there was even from side to side. I felt that was a good place to start, and 10 millimeters wasn't too much toe in or out one way or the other. Now that we had our tie rods even on both sides, I wanted to do a sweep from lock to lock of the steering rack just to make sure there weren't any issues, and as you can see, I ran into an interference. As you can see here, as I turn the steering wheel all the way to the left, the tire interferes with the exhaust system that's here. We're gonna have to correct for that somehow. So as you might have been able to tell, having the tie rods an even length is not gonna work. Also means that I didn't have my steering rack mostly centered. So that was the first thing I focused on after I noticed that when you turn the steering wheel to the left, you got about 3/4 of a turn. It's a quick ratio steering rack. It's not like 1.5 turns. It's just 3/4 of a turn. And then I started to interfere with the exhaust over here. When I went and turned to the right, it would only give me about 1/2 of a turn. So the bottom yoke of the steering wheel would come halfway around when I turned to the right. When I turned to the left, the bottom yoke would go past half and then go over to 3/4. So it was about 270 degrees of turn one way and 180 the other. So what I ended up doing was getting into the car, repositioning the steering wheel. Now what I have is, I don't know, somewhere probably around 220 degrees in both directions to be able to have the steering rack mostly centered. From what I can tell after that, this left side is still gonna have to come in, and then the right side is probably gonna have to go out, just to visually get them looking a little more centered. Again, I don't have any equipment. I'm just kind of going by eyeball and old school theory, measuring where I can, steering wheel rotations, keeping an amount, the degrees of rotation there. But I've got it about even on both sides, so hopefully that means the steering rack is as centered as it can be. So what I'm going to start focusing on now is just trying to get those tires to be visually the same. If I had a better way to measure it, I would, but that's what I'm going to work on. Before I get too far into making more adjustments, just looking at the right side, it looks relatively close. I think the best measurement I'm going to be able to give myself without having a proper setup, calibration, or anything like that is to measure the inner tread to this frame rail and try and mirror that as far as the distance on this left side. Race car things. Great. My track rods aren't the same length either. Not all too surprised by that. But these do not have a typical adjustment style. Most of the radius arms or control arms on the other side are in a fixed position. So what that means is on the turnbuckle that actually turns is where they have the mounting tabs. So to actually make any adjustment to a track rod or anything like that, you kind of have to take off the radius rods. So it's looking like there's going to be a lot of setup that I'm going to have to do just to even figure out if my wheels and all that are even so that I can space my bumper evenly. I'm not confident I got my cuts on both sides of the bumper dead even. So I don't think I can make a measurement across the back of the bumper from 2 common points and make sure that both of those 2 common points are the same equidistance from the center line. I can measure between those 2, or I can just eyeball it and look at it, but this is starting to go down a path that is going to be really long invested. So I'm gonna have to spend a lot of time on this. Might do a good chunk of that off camera. I don't know how much that's gonna be appealing to everyone to view. So I've got some work ahead of me. I'm just gonna go ahead, put my head down and keep at it. What I'm doing here is trying to get this radius arm to turn. What's actually in my hands is the other portion of the control arm linkage. However, it's tied into that radius arm that's there. The section that's closest to my hands on the radius arm, just for whatever reason, did not want to spin on its own. So here I was just trying to loosen it up, try to get it to spin and turn. Worst case scenario, I was going to take this control arm linkage all the way off and see what my interference or what my issue was.
Searching for greatness in a sea of the dying and shameless, a sea of the aimless. I don't want to be one of the nameless. I'ma wake up with the mindset that one day I'm gonna make it, and I don't think I'll be fine if I don't break my limitations. Don't try to stop me, I exist to write my own story. I'll make a decision if I want some peace or if I want the glory, yeah. Don't want a life that is complacent or possibly boring, just want a life that is worth every day exploring,
My whole life I just wanted someone who would notice me. My whole life I just wanted to be somebody to be. Yeah, I just wanna be great. Yeah, I just wanna be great. Yeah, I just wanna be great. Yeah, yeah, I just wanna be great. Yeah, I just wanna be great. Yeah, I just wanna be great. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
What I found was the threads on the connecting piece for the linkage were damaged, which in turn had damaged the internal threads of the radius arm. This is what I needed to do to repair it, was re-tap it and make sure everything worked.
This is a statement to appreciate all that is vacant. It's just for the taking. If you make up your mind, you can take it. I'm never complacent. I would work in a mansion or basement, yeah. There's no replacement for persistence, it's a patience, yeah. In this life, I wanna be soaring, to feel sun inside when it's pouring, and I'll fight till anxiety is foreign. I'm so sick of my mind's extortion.
My whole life I just wanted someone who would notice me. My whole life I just wanted to be somebody to be. Yeah, I just wanna be great. Yeah, I just wanna be great. Yeah, I just wanna be great. Yeah, 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 I just wanna be great. Yeah, I just wanna be great. Yeah, I just wanna be great. Yeah, yeah.
Once I had that radius arm repaired and the control arm linkage put back into it, I worked on getting the control link back to the vehicle and getting the knuckle and everything back together to try and make further adjustments. And we've hit another snag with the steering wheel at full lock to the left. You can see the tie rod is interfering with the spring on the shock. This is why I wanted to repair that radius rod, so I could position the knuckle in a different way to hopefully gain some clearance from where that tie rod's interfering with the strut. Found out later that this strut is actually probably installed inverted and shouldn't be set up like this anyhow. I may end up gaining some clearance if I flip this strut over. I'd done about as much as I felt I sanely could without just driving myself up a wall on the left side. So I decided to go over to the passenger side of the vehicle and look at things there, where I ended up facing a whole nother array of issues. Track bar lengths, radius rod problems, lengths with my heim joints. This project is really just starting to pile up at this point, and all of this just so that I can try and get the front bumpers set straight. Well, that was quite the rabbit hole I've just gone down. As I found out, every single track bar is set completely different. The front heim joints and the rear heim joints, side to side, they're not even. Left side was pulled all the way in on the inboard heim joint, while the right side was pushed out some. So to try and bring the toe back in on the left side, I lengthened the inner heim joint on the lower to push the spindle out on the bottom, which did correct the toe to a certain degree. I've got a little bit more adjustment on that tie rod. However, I came over to this side and this knuckle was towed in terribly. So what I had to do there was actually shorten the outer heim joint on the lower A-arm, whatever you want to call it, and then shorten the heim joint on the back side of it too. Once I got to that, I did see that my toe was moving where I wanted it to. Then I had to take this radius arm here. Of course, just like anything else on this car, it hasn't been moved in forever, and this heim joint was in further than the front section. So I also had to make sure that I got the back heim joint to move on its own. Doesn't really want to do it all too well, but I was able to get there. So now I can make my adjustments on my radius arm that I feel are mostly equal on the inside and outside of it. Same thing with the track bars. Again, I'm just spitballing this. I'm going by eyeball, what I can tell and see. As of right now, it is giving me the adjustments that I want. I am seeing the differences that I need to see. The toe is getting changed by that, and I knew it would. So it is giving me a little bit more adjustability in these tie rods to get them to a better serviceable state. So hopefully, I'll put the wheels on and it'll look a little straighter. We'll see. So, it won't take an eagle eye to see that the bumper is not mocked up on the front of the car. It's not mounted. No progress on the bumper itself has been made. We ended up going down a rabbit hole once we figured out that the suspension and steering wasn't even on each side. I did my best today to try and correct that. However, there's a lot about this chassis that's set up in ways that I've never seen. It's not that I can't understand it or I can't fix it. I'm just having to learn as I go. And I'll try and show you exactly what issues I've run into and what's put a big roadblock and a stopper in our progress for multiple items on this car. So as you would have seen on the driver's side here, I had to actually take this radius arm off because the front linkage here did not want to turn, but the back did. What I ended up finding is that at some point these threads got kind of mashed over and someone must have still tried to adjust it or forced this linkage into this radius arm. And what that ended up doing was marring up the threads on the linkage and marring up the threads on the inside of the radius arm. Another problem I was facing after that is this distance with the tie rod to the strut once it's actually mounted up. Once it's turned all the way to the left, this tie rod starts to hit on this strut. Now, I did quickly swap over the spindle arm or the steering arm from the passenger side here to the driver's side. There is a difference. There is a slot cut into this one. I don't know if you can just barely see it behind there, but it allows you to kind of set like a depth of the tie rod. So I swapped that arm over to the driver's side, and it, for the most part, fixed my issue. But then I started having issues over on the passenger side with the tie rod interfering. So trying to correct the two tie rod interferences was not necessarily a huge hurdle. I knew that there was a way that I could try and swap parts and see what would possibly fix it. I think if I get another steering arm that matches on the right side and put that on the left, I'll be able to get a little bit more clearance and bring that tie rod forward and gain some clearance there. The other thing that I ran into was trying to adjust the track bars. Now with the track bars, very much they are adjustable. You can see that there is a threaded heim joint on the end here. Actually, that's a threaded ball joint, so it can be adjusted, but it's not serviceable. What I mean by that is this part of the lower control arm is welded to the other part of the control arm. So you can't independently turn this arm to set a different depth. I had to disconnect the arm from the inner mounting and lengthen that heim joint. That got me a better toe correction. It forced the bottom of the knuckle out, which gave me better toe in. And once I had this radius arm fixed and was able to turn it, adjusting that gave me a little bit more adjustability. But I started having concerns about the strut running into the top of the control arm here. Now, all of that can just be in setup, I'm sure. However, when I got over to the passenger side, I ran into issues here as well. There are, on this chassis, spacers everywhere. I don't understand the purpose of them. I can get that if it needs to be spaced out so the heim joint can operate on the inside track there, I understand that. On the outside, I really don't get it other than to change some geometry. Maybe so that it'll push the car left instead of trying to go straight. Now my aim is to make the car streetable, so I'm looking for a neutral position of the vehicle wanting to track straight, not pull left, push left, however. So all of these spacers, they don't make sense to me. There's a narrow spacer here, where on the other side it's a wider spacer, and vice versa. They just seem to be mixed and mashed. They just seem to be mixed and mashed all over the car. I'm sure for a racing setup, someone will understand that. I do not. My knowledge comes from regular street cars. Most of the time you're looking for everything neutral, so you have common pickup points, you have common mounting systems. But other than that, the basic setup is exactly the same, side to side, given any kind of clearance issues you have based on vehicle design in general. Now, what's actually put a stopper in my progress for doing anything with the front bumper is not being able to adjust the suspension side to side so that it's mostly neutral and kind of mirrors each other, so I can get those tires to be in a common position. What stopped that is the radius arm for the passenger side. Just like I had issues on the driver's side, I ran into an issue where the heim joint closest to the cab didn't want to turn, but the one further away towards the front of the vehicle would. So I tried the same thing, tried my vice grip on there with a tap, going down the threads. However, I think someone may have run into this before who's owned the car, or it was just that messed up. But I could not for the life of me get the tap straight. So, best laid plans of mice and men, but sometimes, even when you take your time and you're trying to do something, you just fail. Something just doesn't work. And I think that's what happened here today. I got everything adjusted as well as I could. I tried to correct where I could, but ultimately I just had an instance where I failed. So I'm going to need to buy a new radius arm so that I can go ahead and get the suspension set up, but that's going to put a stopper in trying to get the bumper mounted up. So as of right now, I don't know where the next progress is going to be on the car. I've been trying to do things that were going to be in depth, needed to really have a lot of attention done to them, such as the bumpers, looking over the suspension and nut and bolts check anyway, getting the engine running. By all means, I could just give it a shot and see, oh, well, this makes sense to hook it up this way. However, the fuel pump that's on it, or the fuel pump that I got for the vehicle, does not have a specified in or out. So I don't want to hook this fuel pump up backwards and run the fuel wrong. I don't know exactly how to wire the fuel pump up. The wiring schematics don't exactly tell you too much. There's a wire that is black that's supposed to be hooked up to it, but I'm still not sure. I'd rather have my second car to look at and compare to. So as far as the next video, I don't know what we're going to be doing. Luckily, as far as filming, I am very far ahead on my episodes. So hopefully I'll be able to get some parts ordered. I'll be able to get some things here, and by the time the next video comes out, that's all been taken care of, and we just jump back into where we were before. Otherwise, I don't know. So on that very heavy, somber note, we're going to end the episode. I mean, sometimes stuff happens. Failure's a part of life, but we're not going to let it keep us down. We've still got plenty of other things that we have to do to the vehicle. I'll go ahead and jump on ordering some parts, getting those here so we can continue to make progress. And if you have noticed, we do have NYAS merchandise now. Hopefully there's still some left by the time this video releases. If I do have any left, I'll have a link and description in the description down below on how you can get your merchandise. Otherwise, thanks for staying around to the end of the video. Make sure that you like and subscribe. It really helps us out. If you can, share the videos. We're really trying to get to 1,000 subscribers here soon so that it can give us the opportunity to start monetizing our videos, and hopefully we can start making much better content for you guys. But otherwise, thanks for coming along. I hope you guys have a good day. Goodbye.